From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's your voice, your vote. Reporting from the Newseum in Washington, Matthew Dowd.
Foreign policy taking center stage in the presidential campaign this week. And we're joined now by our Powerhouse Roundtable. As always, George Will, Donna Brazil, Yahoo's Washington Bureau Chief David Chalian, conservative talk radio host Dana Lash, and Ruth Marcus from the Washington Post. Thank you all for being here. George, I'd like to start with you. We're at that crucial 100-day marker. If you take a look at the last 10 presidential elections, 9 of them have been won by the person that was ahead at this point in time. We're dead even, so we're in a place that we've never been before. But what have we learned so far previous to the 100 days that can tell us what we might see in the next 100 days?
Well, first, a footnote about the 100 days. The election's 100 days from now. The first voting begins in Iowa on September 27th. 5 days later, on October 2nd, Ohio begins to vote with this new phenomenon that I think is really deplorable and complicates campaigning terribly. So 2 states at least will have started voting before the first debate. Now, you want to know about the future? Look at the immediate past. Look at the last month. We've had the Supreme Court decision affirming the constitutionality of Obamacare. Didn't really help Obama. We've had an onslaught of anti-Bain ads. Didn't really hurt Romney. It drove his negatives up. It may have driven Obama's up more. We've had a terrible jobs report, and it's still tied, which suggests, as you indicated in your talk with Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Madden, that it may be some blunder, some tiny thing that will cause the needle to move. So far, nothing else has.
Donna, what's your sense of what we've seen so far and what that might tell us about the next 100 days?
Well, first of all, I'm excited because finally, in about 101 days, I can go back to watching soap operas here in D.C. and not all of those nasty commercials that are broadcast for people in Virginia. So I'm excited about that. Look, first of all, I'm glad that we still have early voting, George, because that means that there won't be a lot of congestion on Election Day, and we should have more accessibility. But what we know is that it's deadlocked, it's tight, and the polls are like those boats in the Venice Canal, useless in rough waters, because we're looking at a very small, tiny segment of the electorate that will decide this election. Less than 10% of the American people. 10%. I wish I could find them and just say, make up your mind so I can go back to watching sports.
David, you've taken a look at a lot of elections. You're sort of an expert in all of sort of the political history and what's happened thus far. Is this a race that's basically going to not move off dead center but for some surprise? Or can we think there's some moment along the way that's going to change the dynamic?
Talking to both campaigns, they think it's going to remain close all the way through. In fact, they also think that it is a more limited universe of persuadable, truly swing voters than in recent presidential elections. Right now, this is a 2 to 4 point race, maybe the slightest edge to the president at the moment. Neither campaign believes the NBC Wall Street Journal horse race number that shows it a 6-point race. They think that's too wide. I think what we've seen now, looking forward to the next 100 days and what we've seen up to now, a lot of this campaign has been about the definition of Mitt Romney so far, and that's largely due to sort of a gamble, right, that the president's campaign team made by spending more money than they were bringing in. That's never an easy decision to do, to go heavy right now, negatively on Romney, try to frame him, and muddle this one major credential that he has brought into the race of his business record. The Romney campaign has allowed that to happen to some degree, and I think what you heard from Kevin in that interview and what I think you're going to see going forward in the next 100 days, largely due to sort of the calendar and the events demand it. At the convention, they're going to start filling in a different story of Mitt Romney that right now the American people don't really have to discuss at the kitchen table.
Dana, do you think there's any breakout thing, or do you think the public, we're not even at the last 100 days of this race and the public's had 2 years of this, do you think there's just have Election Day tomorrow and let's get this thing done, or do you think there's still something they need to find out going forward they haven't heard already?
I think Mitt Romney, in terms of going out and wooing grassroots and kind of closing that daylight between the Republican Party and grassroots, that's something that needs to be done a little bit more. Maybe we'll see that during the convention, because that's kind of the watershed moment for things like that to occur. But independents decide every single election. I mean, think about it. I disagree with some of what's been said, because granted they're tied right now, and some of the campaigns believe that this could be close going into November. But I think back to 2008, which was a historic election, and this president was elected in, this was a mandate that Barack Obama received when he was elected in 2008. For this Democrat incumbent to be tied right now with Mitt Romney, to me, is a huge red flag. And not just looking at the national polls, going state by state, looking at these battleground states. Independents are leaning towards Mitt Romney. You look at the latest New York Times poll, you have 70% of registered voters that think that he's doing better on the economy over this president. That's huge.
And Ruth, do you agree with Dana that though this race seems tied, there are some fundamentals that may be indicative of something that may happen, that though it's tied today, that there's some environmental factors that really are at play?
I think that there's red flags on both sides. You could look at the red flag of what happened to the 2008 mandate and say, if you look at this lousy economy, the astonishing thing is that Mitt Romney is not further ahead of the president, and that instead we're stuck in this dead-even race. So what do we know? Mitt Romney is not the most adroit candidate in the world. Barack Obama is suffering from a lousy economy that doesn't seem to be getting better anytime soon enough to help him. And this is an election that, unlike 2008, is not going to be about hope and change. It's going to be about fear and loathing. And I know this won't make a difference to the campaign, but I want to bemoan the phenomenon of campaigning by gaffe. Where it's
Well, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because, Don, I wanted to ask you that question, and George brought this up. In a race that's dead even, we've sort of focused on the gaffes. The campaigns, each side have hoped that the other side's gaffe has made a difference. So I want to sort of turn to foreign policy in London, and the gaffe or mistake or the misspeak or whatever way you say that Mitt Romney did. Do you think that is telling about him on the world stage, or do you think that's just a moment that's going to pass?
Again, this is an opportunity for Mitt Romney to introduce himself not only to foreign leaders and foreign countries, but also to the American people. And supposedly one of his strengths is he turned around the Olympics in 2002, and he took what should have been one of his greatest strengths to go and talk about his Olympic experience and made it into his greatest weakness by pointing out his lack of foreign policy. You had two conservative politicians, Mr. Cameron and the mayor of London, criticize Mitt Romney. So this was not a good debut on the foreign stage.
I think we need to stop trying to redefine gaffe, because it's not a gaffe when you go and repeat towards the British Prime Minister or the London mayor what's actually been in British headlines for the past several weeks. I mean, Piers Morgan even said, well, he told the truth, so what of
well,
it?
As I said, that's a definition of a gaffe, a politician accidentally telling the truth. But do you think it makes any difference?
I don't think it makes any difference at all. And the London's mayor obviously does not see eye to eye with Romney on politics. He's not of that political ideology. I just think that this was like a gotcha moment. I can't even believe that a big deal was made about this. If they're angry at Romney for repeating what the headlines are, then they should be angry at their own British press.
Here's the impact it has. It set up more pressure on the Romney people to make sure the rest of the foreign trip is flawless, so that there doesn't become a whole story about a completely failed attempt for a potential president going overseas. But this one day of bad headlines about the lead of every story was how he was getting hammered in the British press. That's not a story that has legs. So I think this was a distraction.
Unless there are electoral votes in the United Kingdom.
I want to get to the end of the trip. And I want to get to the end of the trip where Mitt Romney's in Israel today. He's going to give us a big speech today. Some of his advisors have projected what they may say or not. Ruth, you just spent a couple of weeks in Israel.
Makes me an Israel expert.
And now you're an expert on Israel. What does that tell you about how they feel, or what the debate in this country related to that?
Well, I think the one thing that I took away understanding about Israel is that it has a little bit of a Sally Field relationship with this president, which is, does he like us? Does he really like us? And they're very nervous about that. And that actually cuts both ways for Mitt Romney. They are interested in him. They are looking forward to hearing from him all the sort of words of support, but they are nervous about this relationship already with the president, who they think they might have him to kick them around for another 4 years, and they don't want to make that relationship worse. And so it's very delicate from the Israeli point of view, and you see Romney's saying all the right things, but what are the real differences between what he would do and what the president would do, and all of the things that President Obama has done to reassure Israel in the last few days?
George?
It's the two stops after London that matter most. And it's right to say that he's actually not courting those nations. He's courting the children of those nations who now live in the United States, the Poles in southwestern Pennsylvania and Cleveland and Detroit and all the rest. In Israel, he's courting not the Jewish vote in this country. Maybe it'll make a small difference in Florida, and that can make a big difference. But the majority of American Jews are going to vote Democratic, always have, as far as I can tell, always will. The great support for Israel right now, the energy is in the evangelical community, which is part of the Republican base. So the trip to Israel is a way of firing up this enormously important and somewhat skeptical of Mitt Romney, Republican base.
David, I want to turn to the economy, which is, I think Mitt Romney's going to come back and as quickly as he possibly can probably start talking about the economy again and hoping he gets some plus from the trip.
A lot of jobs report on Friday to help him talk about it.
So a jobs report on Friday, which will come out, but we just had a GDP figure that came 1.5% that was mediocre at best. From what you've seen over the past, is that a plus for Barack Obama, or is that a minus for Barack Obama?
I don't know how it can be a plus. I mean, the GDP number is a minus for Barack Obama. And to me, the single most interesting poll number in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll that came out this week was the question, they ask Americans, look forward 12 months, do you think the economy is going to get better or worse or stay the same? 27% of the country thinks that the economy is going to get better. That is the lowest all year long and actually dropped 8 points from last month. That is the weight of 3 bad months of jobs numbers. This GDP number is going to add to that. And if there's not a significant uptick, I think that month of these jobs reports, it does compound. Largely, it's baked into the American people. The economy is clearly bad, right? But if we're down to only 27% of the people are actually optimistic that the economy will get better in that year, that is a very tough number to run
Are
against.
Democrats worried about that? Are they concerned that those sort of baked-in numbers right now are going to make it very hard for President Obama to win this election?
Oh, no, look, no question. Politically, it matters. I mean, a weak economy hurts the incumbent. But on the other hand, we're not sitting around on our hands, you know, looking for things to get worse before, you know, we try to help people. Yes, the economy is tough for President Obama, but I do believe that he has a lot of credibility to go out there and talk about the things, the steps he's taken, the steps that he would like to take, and the steps that the Republicans will continue to oppose because simply they've decided there's only one mission in life, and that is to defeat Barack Obama. But, you know, back in 1980, when we had a Democratic president during hard times, Ronald Reagan had some credibility in going out there and talking to blue-collar voters because he came from a union household. He was president of the union. He talked about his father getting that layoff during Christmas. He had the narrative. Mitt Romney, he talks about firing people.
Let me give you another number to add to yours. 68% of Americans know someone who has lost his job. Now, the question is it going to get better? I think right now we're in what can be fairly called a growth recession. That sounds like an oxymoron. It isn't. We're now in the 4th year of recovery, and we're growing but receding at the same time because we're not growing fast enough to create enough jobs to even take account of the natural growth of the workforce. And look at the variables that have to be feared by the Obama campaign. First, there's Europe, which means Spain. By the way, in the last 15 months, a majority of European governments have been changed by restive electorates. Then there's the emerging markets. Brazil, India, and China have slowed down. We have the fiscal cliff coming up with our own tax policy at the end of the year. Dodd-Frank is 2 years old, and still there's so much uncertainty about it because it's about half written. Food prices are going up in part because we're putting 40% of our corn crop in our gas tanks because of ethanol, and the election itself is a great source of uncertainty.
Ruth, some people have begun to get the sense that this economy has been bad for so long and that people are now having to resettle at a different point, and that basically what's going to happen is the Americans sort of shrug their shoulders and say, listen, there's not much a president can do about this, and so I'm going to pick a president that I sort of feel more in sync with, which seems to be an advantage for the president on that issue. But will the economy and those factors that have been talked about still determine it?
I think so, and since everybody's throwing out numbers, my favorite one for the week is 53% of those in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll disapprove of President Obama's handling of the economy. People do understand, I think, that there is a limited amount that a president can do. Nonetheless, I think the most powerful argument from the Republican side this week was you tried, he's tried, it's not working, let's give somebody else a chance. That's hard to rebut given the limp along. And for all the fun we've had this week with Romney gaffes and Mitt the Twit headlines, I think the worst be President Obama because of this unspinnable 1.5% growth number.
And you want to talk about gas. Here we have 41 straight months of unemployment that's been over 8%, which the stimulus was supposed to have fixed. In terms of gas, it's not good to have the president get up in front of people during an election cycle and say, well, if you have a small business, you didn't build that. Or, as some have tried to say, oh, the Republicans took something out of context. He was talking about the Clinton tax plan, which really actually in context it's even worse because he really was referring to his own plan and the Clinton tax plan. We could get into the 97 tax cuts and everything else. Yes, I did.
As a small business person, what he was saying is that if you rely on roads and bridges and skilled workforce, public education, that we are together, business and government, we have to have a partnership.
No.
That was the context.
Taken out of context.
It was not taken out of context.
It was completely taken out of context, but it matters because it falls into this pre-existing narrative, which is very powerful among people, that the president doesn't get business in general and small business in particular. And that's why that one counts.
No, it was in context.
I have a question for my friend Donna. The president is...
Touch me again when you say that, my friend. I like that.
That's when you know you need to be nervous.
I know.
We are told that the president is the brightest president since Madison, the best educated president since John Quincy Adams, and the most articulate politician since Pericles. Why does he spend so much time explaining what he actually meant?
When you're explaining, you're losing.
Well, look, I don't believe the president was wrong in saying something that has been said over and over again by so many, including Elizabeth Warren, who said it better and went viral. But George, I mean, we cannot change Republican spin or Republican narrative.
Oh, no.
What we can do is talk about what the president is doing to help small businesses compete, what the president is doing to help small businesses grow and hire people. That's what we can talk about. We're not anti-small business. We're trying to help small businesses compete.
I'm going to change up just slightly on this and go to a sort of a broader topic, which is on discourse in the country. More people than anybody, when I was asking what I wanted to talk about, they wanted to talk about how can we change the way we talk to each other, politicians, leaders, and all of that. And if you take a look at the data in this, it's overwhelmingly negative what's gone on, David. And I'm sort of the mind of that negative ads are a lot like weed killer, which is if you have too little, then the weeds come back. If you have too much, then you kill your own lawn. In this circumstance that the president is, where 90% of the ads he's running, is he worried about killing the White House lawn by doing what he's doing?
Well, I think there is, because of how tight this election is going to be, I think there's a recognition that whoever wins the presidency, probably going to win it by a more narrow margin than it was won the last time. The margins for the majority parties in both chambers are probably going to be more narrow after this. So I don't hear anyone on either side thinking that this election is going to somehow transform us and move us as a country to a better place with better discourse. It seems to me that we're going to be actually further into this rut after this election.
So do you think this is something we just have to deal with and there's no way to change it, George?
I don't think it's that bad. I mean, look at our politics in the 1790s when the Jeffersonians said if Adams wins, we're going to have a monarchy. And the Adams people, if Jefferson wins, they're going to confiscate the Bibles. We had fist fights and gun for the Congress in the 1850s. Mild stuff.
But at least they said, sir, before they went into the fight.
What the difference is, yes, and George, you left out the caning.
And they called each other hermaphrodites in their ads as well.
But here's the difference. The nastiness is about, it's either misleading or it's about peripheral issues. We have a very serious set of issues facing the country, both domestically, primarily domestically, and in terms of foreign policy. And there is neither detail nor serious engagement on the part of both campaigns about these issues, and instead we just sort of have interludes between gaffes that each side seizes on to accuse the other of saying something that he didn't really mean. mean, instead of saying, this is my view of government, this is my prescription for dealing with the fiscal cliff, this is what I'd like to do going forward, specifically, not just in broad generalities, and engaging on that. The people deserve a better conversation than they're getting from their
We're
political
not going to put the
candidates.
substance over the superficial, because the superficial is more sexier. It's people like to talk about.
It's easier.
What do people remember about the Roosevelts? The malefactors of great wealth, the economic royalists. This kind of rhetoric is not specific, it's colorful, it tells you what they think about sections of society, what government ought to do. I don't think this is that different.
And let me turn to another topic that some people say is serious and some people say is silly, which is the controversy over Chick-fil-A and what the CEO had to say about gay marriage. Let's take a look.
We're inviting God's judgment on our nation when we shake our fist at him and say, you know, we know better than you as to what constitutes a marriage. And I pray God's mercy on our generation that has such a prideful, arrogant attitude to think that we would, the audacity to try to redefine what marriage is all about.
Then came with pictures of Sarah Palin going to Chick-fil-A in Texas to show that she supported Chick-fil-A, and then we had politicians around the country trying to keep this business from being in their cities. Is this a real issue, or is this something that's just something that people just want to talk about?
Well, it kind of surprises me because this is an establishment that closes on Sundays. Obviously, the CEO is a Christian. People are shocked that he's for traditional marriage. It just doesn't make sense to me. The thing that bothers me, though, if an individual wants to boycott and not go to a business because of that owner's beliefs, that's fine. But when you have the mayor of Philly, or the councilman in Philly, when you have the mayor of Chicago, of Boston, saying they're going to ban these establishments, that's a First Amendment issue.
It's a First Amendment issue that wouldn't last 10 seconds in court to condition a government entitlement or privilege on the content of your political thought. Second, the head of Chick-fil-A is being excoriated by these people, by Rahm Emanuel, for example, for holding a view on marriage that the president held when he was elected in 2008.
It's so illustrative of our politics, right? We sort ourselves ideologically by neighborhood. We sort ourselves to some extent ideologically by what churches or houses of worship we go to. So why don't we just sort ourselves by fast food restaurants? And, so I totally agree with George and Dana. It's idiotic and actually kind of repulsive for politicians to talk about this. But if you don't want to go, don't go.
The gay rights movement isn't driving this. The gay rights movement is far too sensible. These are pandering, third-rate politicians pandering to them.
Mayor Menino backed off his remarks, right? I mean, he realized pretty quickly that he had gone too far by saying, sort of by fiat, that he was going to be able to keep Chick-fil-A out of Boston. But he walked those back because of exactly these issues.
And here's the difference. I support, I'm a Christian. I go to church on Sundays. I believe in traditional marriage. But I eat Oreos. I don't care that Oreo came out with a rainbow Oreo. Why didn't they do it sooner? Because it's like quadruple stuff. I would have loved to have eaten that.
Are you ordering from Amazon?
I order from Amazon. I use Apple computers because I don't want to segregate of ideology and encourage mediocrity.
I'd like to finish. I'm going to finish this up with a quick lightning round that go ahead, Donna.
I've never been to Chick-fil-A, and it has nothing to do with his Christian values.
It's got good sandwiches.
Sing the Popeyes.
I love Popeyes. I think if you really want an alternative, love that chicken from Popeyes, just go ahead and get the Louisiana best.
So let's do a lightning round, George. Lightning round on the next 100 days, a moment that may break this race loose. I'm going to start with you, George.
The jobs numbers for September, which will come out in October and be the last before people vote.
October 5th. Donna?
Presidential debates, especially the first one. Mitt Romney will be on the same stage with the president, and the American people will finally get a chance to size him up against the incumbent.
October 3rd is that debate right now. It's planned, David.
And it's in Denver. So, I'm with Donna. The first debate, I think, is the critical event from now through Election Day because of the early vote issue that George pointed out earlier. I think it will have the greatest impact. It's also the commission released format, and it's the domestic policy debate. So I think it will be most important on people's minds.
I can't wait to see that debate. But I'm thinking the RNC and especially Mitt Romney's speech. Is he going to close that daylight between grassroots and the Republican Party? This is a unifying moment.
Convention?
Convention, not very relevant. Debates, yes.
So the first debate,
the first
too.
Debate.
The interesting thing about the debates and that, they're all within the first week of October. I picked unknown. I think so many of these races in 2008, we had Lehman fail that we did not know was going to happen. 2004, you had the Osama bin Laden video. And in 2000, the DWI that President Bush in the last 5 days that got related. So I think the first week in October could tell us a lot about that. Thank you all for being here. And we'll be right back with former Vice President Dick Cheney.